If you've ever struggled to play a guitar solo that's listenable, you understand the challenge. In this video, I'm going to share with you my top 5 checkpoints to make sure that my phrasing is on point in my own guitar solos. Plus, once we've covered how to get your blues and rock phrasing together, I'm going to show you a secret tip that'll dramatically improve your guitar solo note choices. Let's get started. Number 1, remember the listener. Who's going to be listening to you play? Is it your family? Is it a coffee shop? A club full of people? They've all got something in common. If you don't connect with them, you're going to have a bad gig. So how do we do that? How do we connect with them? We use something called phrasing. Now, what is phrasing? Phrasing is about crafting a musical idea for maximum expression and for communication too. So what does that mean to you? Have you ever considered, when you're playing a guitar solo, phrasing? You ever considered that you're playing for someone else? We're mostly thinking about what? Our scale patterns. But the listener could care less about that. They have no idea what a scale pattern is anyway. So to connect with an audience, we need to speak their language. They need to hear something that relates to them. So how do we do that? How do we bridge the gap between our instrument and our audience's vocal language? We do that through something called phrasing. And this is imitating a style of speaking or singing. So phrasing is really not about what scales you play, but it's about how you play them. So here we go. Here's an example of ignoring the listener and then using phrasing. So that was not using phrasing. Now listen to the difference here. Let's talk about number 2. Let's start off with a hook. One of my favorite players is David Gilmour. He's a master of phrasing. In the opening phrase of Comfortably Numb, he rakes across the muted strings. That rake there isn't there by accident. It's the beginning of a very important idea. If you had something important to say, what would you do? Would you muddle it under your breath? No, you wouldn't do that. You'd use your tone of voice to announce it. And he does that there. It's like a low growl that leads up to a singing, lasting high pitch. He's doing something similar to a vocal growl to get an idea started. How can we do this? How can we start off our phrases like this? Well, let's listen to some different vocal styles and try to imitate them. Then we can get creative with it. Here's an example of using a hook to get a phrase started. Number 3, what's the next step to being great at phrasing? That's playing in sentences. Of course, you're not going to form words with your guitar licks unless you scream into your pickups. But what can we learn about the spoken sentence that can help us with our phrasing? A spoken sentence has a beginning, has a middle, and has an end. It has structure. Do your guitar solos have any structure? And no, playing until you run out of ideas, that is not a real structure. But sentences also have rhythm. How about this? Just repeat what I just said. Sentences also have rhythm. Is that how you normally say it? Well, try it this way. Sentences also have rhythm. So we can take rhythms that we naturally speak in our regular sentences and we can use them in our licks and phrases on the guitar. Let's try that on the guitar. Do you like to breathe? I sure do, and I'll bet your listeners do too. Even though you can play steady notes on and on for minutes on end, you may not want to. Why? Well, your listeners used to breathing themselves. They are most likely used to listening to singers who like to breathe as well too. We're conditioned to expect that pause every now and again. So if you go too long without pausing, your listener might start to tune out. If a good sentence typically lasts for a certain duration, then our phrasing would be well served to do the same thing. What's not too short? What's not too long for you? Well, try that in your phrases and see what happens. A great way to get more familiar with sentence structure is to listen to the greats. They use this all of the time and make notes of the length of their phrases. Let's move on to number 4. We're going to use some punctuation. So we've talked about the beginning of the phrase. That's the hook. Then we talked about the body of the phrase. That's the length and the rhythm. What's left? Well, we got to end the thing. We have to end it somehow. How do you end a sentence? Well, you do that with punctuation. How do you end a phrase? The same way, with punctuation. You might think that doesn't make any sense. Well, here is the first time that I'm going to mention anything about the notes we're playing themselves. Picking a strong note to end an idea always works. Well, what's a strong note? Well, I have a question for you. What key are you in? I'm in the key of D. Whatever note that is that you're in, that's the easiest way to finish a phrase. So make sure you know where your tonic note is at all times. You need to do this. It's low-hanging fruit. It's easy stuff. It always works. You're going to need to end something. Always hit the root. Here's an example. How easy was that? All I did was played a little bit of a lick and then ended on a D note. I played the D up high, I played the D in the middle, the D down low, but I always ended on a D note, and each phrase had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I was ready to move on to the next thing. Let's finish this up with number 5. Don't play on the edge of what you can do. Have you ever heard or been a weak public speaker? Someone who just can't speak in front of anyone? What do you hear? You hear lots of mumbling, stuttering, stammering. You hear a lot of ums, uhs, wells, so, all of those kind of things. What can you tell being a listener of all of that? What comes across as a lack of confidence. And that happens to us as guitar players as well. Mostly I've noticed that a lot of well-meaning guitar players are trying to play well above their skill set. And what comes out? Aimlessness, missed notes, disjointed ideas, a lack of confidence. A phrase doesn't have to be complicated to be extremely effective. When you're playing something that feels comfortable, your brain is free to actually listen to what you're playing. The panic is gone. And this is the way that you would normally communicate verbally. So why don't you give it a try in your solos as well and see what happens? And finally, remember that you can practice phrasing, and you should set aside a little practice time to do just that. This is definitely something that can be refined, even if phrasing doesn't come naturally to you. Earlier in the video, I said I'm going to share with you my favorite secret tip to dramatically improve my guitar solo note choices. Well, we touched on this earlier with punctuation by playing the tonic note to end a phrase. But by putting a little more time into knowing your chords and the notes in your chords, you can dramatically increase your quality by using smart note choices. Just by knowing the root note of the current chord that's playing, we can up our punctuation game a little bit more. If a certain chord is playing at the time, play the root of that chord as your punctuation. You'll perfectly match the chord progression. If you know the names of the chords, you've got no excuse. You will never have to land on a weak note. All you do is land on those notes. You see, strong notes are like periods and exclamation points. They tell you that it's over, but we don't always end a phrase with them. Sometimes we leave things up in the air. What if your phrase didn't end with a strong note? What would it sound like? It's like a question, isn't it? Intentionally doing that, intentionally ending a few phrases with a question, with a weak note, not a chord tone, can add a lot of complexity to your phrases and set up a very powerful phrase after the fact. So there's all of the important things you need to know if you're going to get started with phrasing. Now, if you are interested in taking the next step and seeing how you can effortlessly play blues guitar solos in any key, no matter where your hand is on the guitar, then check out my free blues soloing course. Get your blues solos under control, and that's linked in the description below, and I will see you there.